reduced state. Why not bring them back? In Hungary, it used to be 17% forest. It used to be 70% forest. It's now 17%. We're going to plant 250,000 acres of new forest in Hungary that goes into the national park system there that will be very heavily protected. It'll be a long-term, enormous benefit to that ecosystem there. And the same thing goes in restoring the ocean. If we don't restore the harm already done by climate change, by carbon dioxide, what good does it do to do no further harm, right? We have to also heal the harm done.
I just want to know, one concern I have is what really results in geological storage. You got to have geological storage to make this. Trees fall over and die and they decompose, and then their CO2 is emitted. And I suppose what you're telling me is that these credits you're buying is to keep these forests in perpetuity, so you just replace the tree that's fallen down and decomposed. Is that the idea?
Forests are self-sustaining green machines that keep themselves going in perpetuity. The fossil fuel age is only about 200 years old at best, really 100 years old in high gear. By all accounts, it's only going to last a few hundred years longer. In the ocean, it's very easy to see carbon repositioned in the deep ocean for periods of millennia. Right? It may be back 2,000 years from now, but the fossil fuel age will be long gone.
I want to ask about the certified emissions reductions. As I understand, these are certificates in Europe. Do your markets, and I ask all of you, do you use those? Do you invest in them? And are they a prototype that we should consider in the United States?
You have
a certificate. I'm going to ask all the panel, not just from Mr. George. Anyone that wants to answer the question, go ahead. But anyone?
Mr. Inslee, the certified emission reductions are actually units that are created under the Kyoto Protocol. The European Union has a trading system set up that recognizes those credits. I think certainly within the framework that the Kyoto Protocol has established, these are credible carbon offset instruments. The questions have been raised about projects here and there, but overall it's a pretty credible mechanism.
So, Mr. Blanchard, in your company, do you sell those? Do you meet those certification standards?
Well, no, because they're really for sale within the Kyoto Protocol. They're not really for sale in the voluntary market. There are VERs, voluntary emission reductions, that are, again, it's just a denomination of the credit, that are held to a very similar standard, typically from developing countries. We sell projects that are in the United States. And so we don't right now sell anything that would qualify there. I think there are standards in development, though, including the gold standard that Mr. Rahm was talking about before, that incorporate most, if not all, of the same attributes that those CERs and VERs.
So would you meet their standards in a domestic context?
Well, today it's not so much a question of whether we meet the standards, sir. It's more a question of whether the projects do. I actually went to the gold standard project database this morning, anticipating some of this conversation, and there is only one project listed in that database that's operational today.
Thank you.
You have to understand that carbon credits are you should think about them in terms of bottles of wine. They have a vintage year and a label. And there's quite a large variety of different carbon credit markets out there. It's important each year. The vintage is important because we retire the credits on an annual basis. But the label's also critically important. So there's a plethora of different labels of carbon credits emerging in the markets around the world, especially those markets where there's mandatory requirements.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick questions. Mr. Broekhoff, to you. You said you all were developing some accounting standards on carbon offsets. So let me ask you this. Do you think that it is possible, or that we should even try to develop federal guidelines for voluntary carbon offsets, develop some guidelines that would clarify the voluntary carbon offset industry and still preserve it as a voluntary industry? What is your take on that, or should we just leave it alone and avoid full-scale government regulation?
I think it's possible for the federal government to provide some oversight and guidance, for example, in recommending best practice accounting protocols for the quantification of carbon offsets. Also, perhaps in terms of certifying verifiers or certifying registries that could serve this market without directly providing, controlling the market or providing direct regulation.
George?
Well, it's all about money, right? If you buy carbon credits from a hybrid car vehicle producer, right, you buy a hybrid vehicle, you pay about $5,000 extra for the hybrid vehicle over the gas version of that vehicle. It doesn't emit about 2 tons of carbon dioxide per year, but you paid $5,000 up front for it. If you buy carbon credits from trees and ocean projects around the world, you might pay about $5 a ton for it. So not everybody can afford to go out and buy a brand new automobile with a $5,000 premium on it to reduce their carbon footprint by 2 tons a year. But everybody can afford to plant enough trees to get 2 tons a year. That's $10 a year. Everybody can afford to do that. A family of 4 in the United States has a carbon footprint of about 20 tons per year. At $5 a ton that tree planting projects are selling in that, that's about $100 a year. That's $8.33 a month. So, buy Mother Nature 1 cheap cocktail a month, and you've taken care of her. Now, people who don't like offset projects, who want the high-priced, engineered solutions, are very opposed to this. But it's part of the solution, and it also heals the harm that's done. So, and everybody can afford it. So the voluntary market to choose these affordable, low-end solutions, the green solutions, is a very practical step.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. George, if you're talking about hiring a tree, I think some of my foresters in Tennessee have a lot of trees they'd like to hire out for you. Now, you're a for-profit company.
Yeah, we're a for-profit public company.
And you are looking to increase and stabilize your income stream. So do you think that the entrepreneurial spirit that we have in the country, the entrepreneurial spirit we're seeing around this industry, coupling that with an increased environmental awareness by American families and certainly by organizations and companies could drive the voluntary carbon offset market without burdensome government regulation?
Yeah, I do, and we're somewhat of an anomaly. We're an American entrepreneurial activity. We do all of our science here, and virtually 100% of our money comes from Zurich and London. Right.
So you would leave government out of voluntary carbon offset market, and Mr. Brokoff says he thinks that it would be helpful in
I'd
establishing...
love to have the government aboard on this voluntary market. I think it would help. I think people would have more confidence if there was some government oversight. It would make life a lot easier. Heaven help me, sometimes the bureaucracy is a bit burdensome, but it's a positive thing generally.
Okay. Mr. Belcher, I know I'm going to run out of time, and I may submit my question to you. I'm curious about selling electricity through renewable energy, and I had asked you about if you received any government subsidies. And I know that the wind turbine project with the Rosebud, Sue Rosebud, did receive some, and I know there was a DOE grant and I think a rural development grant in that. So I've got some questions surrounding that. If you will, sir, I will submit those to you in writing for an answer in writing from Native Energy. And I think it's important for us to look at whether or not this is something that is sustainable and something that is going to be profitable and doable and duplicative. So that it can be replicated. So let's, I do have some questions about that. I will go ahead and yield back my time and then submit that in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Lady's time has expired, and we ask the panel to respond in writing to the General Lady's questions when she propounds them. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, Mr. George, you partially answered this question. The several estimates suggest that the average American family generates 20 tons carbon dioxide annually, and I think about 4.5 for the rest of the world.
The rest of the world's much lower.
Yes. And then you talked about the fact that to buy a an automobile that actually generates less greenhouse gas contributors will cost more money. Do you think that the reverse ought to be the case in the United States? In other words, that you essentially pay more money if you buy a large emitter. If you want a big SUV, you pay more for that than you would pay for buying a hybrid. Because right now, it's, if you're trying to be environmentally sensitive, it costs you more money. And so, just like cigarettes cost more money, if you want to, if you want to go ahead and smoke in spite of the hazards and the way you contribute to the rising health costs in the country, okay, it's going to cost you $4 a pack. Is it clear enough?
Yeah, I think sure. If you larger footprint items, ought to pay their way, right? And hopefully that recently we had an owner of a large mega yacht. It's kind of like the most extreme example of an object that somebody might own. And they contacted us because they were tied up next to our research ship. It's down in Florida picking up scientific gear. And it's just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, polished to a high polish. And the owner of the yacht, I was drinking coffee on our research ship one morning, and he was drinking coffee on his, and we were literally tied together. So we could almost touch. And he said, well, tell me about all this carbon sequestration stuff. And I said, well, you tell me about your boat. How many gallons of fuel do you burn? And he told me how many gallons of fuel he burned. And I said, well, let's do the calculation. And I just did the back of the envelope calculation. I said, well, if you wanted to reduce the carbon footprint of this 140-foot mega yacht, bigger than our research ship, right, you'd have to pay about $2,000 a year to make that zero by planting trees. And he said, I just paid more than that to varnish the back rail on this boat. Right? And he says, let me get my checkbook out. Right? And he did. So, if it's affordable, people will do this, right? But if you have a 20-ton footprint and you got to pay, effectively $2,500 a ton, right? That's Toyota's charge for your footprint. Well, that's a big number, right? You got to shell out $50,000 to go carbon neutral. Well, some people can afford that. I can't, right? Most people can't afford that, but I can afford $100 a year, right? To do the right thing for the greener solution. And that's why the British Stern report that talked about the need to spend $3 to $4 trillion immediately to address this problem of climate change is such a staggering number. It's because they use that engineering metric to come by that number. If you use the green metric to come by the cost of making a really meaningful part of the solution to climate change, we can afford it easily. Right? It's very low cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And it's immediately available, right? We can do it today.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States has historically been the biggest contributor to greenhouse trapping gases in the atmosphere, but that's changing now, and we have some other competitors out there that are going to do at least as good a job as we are of contributing those gases. And I think one of our biggest challenges is to work with those other countries to find ways to cooperate toward reducing our footprint and their footprint at the same time. What lessons can we learn from the voluntary system out there, and maybe moving toward mandatory systems that could be applied, that we could encourage other countries to follow that may be large contributors in the future? And I'll take an answer from anyone.
Well, I guess I would just point out that under the Kyoto Protocol, part of the idea of having the offset project types be based in emerging markets is precisely to try to stimulate the development of renewable energy and other clean development in those markets, because as they mature and as there's increasing demand for energy in those markets, it would be nice